How do we shine for God in the world around us? How can we be his light in this world? Welcome back to Normal, our series on living the Christian life through the pandemic. We saw last time that 1 Peter describes the true grace of God. That is, the Christian life founded on God's grace. God has saved us by his grace and calls us to live holy lives, to honor him. So picking up where we left off, chapter 2 verse 12 says, "Keep your conduct among the Gentiles honorable, so that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day of visitation." So how do we do that? How do we have to live to draw the world to glorify God? The answer might surprise you. Peter says, "Do as you're told." The next verse, verse 13, reads, "Be subject for the Lord's sake to every human institution, whether it be to the emperor as supreme or to governors as sent by him. Obey your government." Then he says the same thing about other areas of life. Verse 18, "Servants, be subject to your masters." And chapter 3, verse 1, "Wives, to your husbands." Now it's important to note here that someone having authority doesn't in any way mean they have more value in God's eyes. We have Jesus as the example here, submitting to human authorities. Now, authority is just part of how God in his wisdom has ordered the world. So why obey? Isn't this the least impressive, most boring way to glorify God? Well, sin is denying God's authority. And so turning from sin must mean submitting to God. And a key way in which we obey God is by submitting to the authorities that he has created. So what are they? Governments we still have. Servants and masters is a close parallel with boss and employee, or possibly your supervisor at your university. That marriage is still marriage. And so as Christians, we want to uphold God's design for it, even when it's countercultural. And I think the people who make the rules at your university must also count as an authority over their students. The point is, we show that we're followers of Jesus by obeying authority. And obviously not if they're commanding you to sin. But our basic approach to authority is to obey. And it's for the Lord's sake, chapter 2, verse 13. So it never depends on whether you think the authorities have made the best decision. And because of sin, God's righteous authority is expressed corruptly by sinful human authorities. And even so, God still says that we are to obey them. And our ultimate example for that is Jesus. Chapter 2, verse 20 and 21. "For what credit is it if when you sin and are beaten for it, you endure? But if when you do good and suffer for it, you endure, this is a gracious thing in the sight of God. For to this you have been called, because Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example, so that you might follow in his steps." That's how we're saved, by Jesus humbly submitting to unjust authorities, even to the point of death. And we're called to follow him. And isn't it a really radical, countercultural thing to do? That letting somebody else decide over your life? It's not very Swedish. It's very Christ-like when we do it with him in mind. So practically, keep the law. Keep the speed limit when you're driving. Obey government restrictions on travel and gatherings. Pay for public transport. And he even says, honor everyone. So we should speak respectfully about our government, whether or not we agree with them. Even speak respectfully about that professor that everyone else complains about. honor everyone. It's very countercultural and against our sinful human nature. Respect authorities in the university. Don't join in gossip about your boss or your lecturer. Do marriage in the way 1 Peter instructs us to. You'll stand out. People may not always like it. It may make them uncomfortable. But you will be showing them Christ's humble obedience. What an opportunity to speak about the gospel. And Peter goes on, even when you're not under authority, that same humble, selfless, Christ-like attitude should shine out towards others. Chapter 3, verse 9, do not repay evil for evil or reviling for reviling, but on the contrary, bless, for to this you are called. And again, he explains in verse 17, for it is better to suffer for doing good, if that should be God's will, than for doing evil. For Christ also suffered once for sins, the righteous for the unrighteous, that he might bring us to God. Now, that's how we're saved, and not by Jesus fighting for his rights, but by him laying them down, meeting the most horrendous injustice with love and humility. Let's be like him.